for joining PubMatic's office hours on Sellers.JSON and supply chain object. My name is Eric Bozinny. I'm the Director of Inventory Quality for PubMatic. And joining me and speaking soon is Vemulapalli, who's our Senior Product Manager. The IAB Sellers.JSON and OpenRTB supply chain object specs have been finally finalized by the IAB Tech Lab just last week. This initiative has gained a significant amount of press since its release and has seen increasing buyer interest and adoption. And first of all, we're going to talk about, before I hand it over to Ash, what's driving this? And a drive to transparency is really the overriding reason, but also shortcomings in app ads.txt and ads.txt. They were created for very specific reasons and needs, and they alone can't solve the transparency problem, which is what we need in the supply chain. And all this, of course, brings improved buyer confidence in their entire supply chain and what's going on there. And as a nice byproduct of this, opportunities for malicious activity decrease, because when you have a lit up supply chain, these bad actors who would insert themselves in there without anyone knowing it and send, for example, bot traffic in to inflate revenues, you can't do that anymore. So it's a rising tide that's going to lift all boats. And of course, our strategic vision for PubMatic and for the industry is really transparency and quality. So we fully support all these moves towards transparency. Now, a little housekeeping before we move to Ash. Next slide, Ash. Ash is going to go through the training. He's going to review the basics of the initiatives and help troubleshoot special case scenarios. And then at the end, we're going to open the floor to questions. And you have a couple options. One is you can, in the interface there, you can raise your hand. It's a little hand there where the circle is. And at the very bottom of that icon bar on the right is a Q&A box. And that's another option if you just like to ask a question and have us read it and then answer it that way. So after Ash finishes, we'll open up to questions. And also, I want to remind everyone, if you have any questions or would like more details, please follow up with your customer service managers. Happen to our extensive library of training and technical information. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ash.
Thank you, Eric. Welcome all PubMatic customers from APAC. Today I will walk you through two major initiatives that IAB has recently launched. The first one is Sellers.JSON and the second piece is supply chain object. I hope to wrap up the basics in the first 30 minutes and we can use the next 30 minutes to do the Q&A. So let me start off with Sellers.JSON. What was the problem? You guys are just fresh off finishing ads.txt and app.txt, and all of a sudden we have a new initiative. What is this all about, right? So the problem after implementing ads.txt is the buyer started realizing that although ads.txt gives information about the authorized digital sellers, it doesn't necessarily provide insights into who those sellers are and how many sellers are involved for a given transaction. The motivation behind Sellers.JSON is to expose all that information on the ad system's public domain. The consequence of this is buyers and intermediaries can cross-check sellers' information. Suspicious vendors in the supply chain would quickly become apparent. I will show you how they become apparent, but this is the problem behind which Sellers.JSON came into existence. So what is Sellers.JSON and how does it look? So what you are seeing here is the definition of Sellers.JSON, the way it came out in the public comment period. On the left side of the screen, you see the primary structure of this file. It contains a bunch of sellers that an ad system is associated with. Then it has identifiers that represent the company, then contact email at that particular company, the address and version of the standard, and an extension file. On the right hand side, what you see is an expansion of each seller. So the seller would be expanded to seller ID, directness, is confidential, name would be the name of the seller, domain would be the domain of the seller, comment and extension. As you can see, the fields marked in blue are mandatory. The fields in gray are optional. Name and domain are always required unless you mark the seller as confidential. We recommend you guys not to use that option and just publish seller ID, the seller type, name, and domain. The reason is some of the buyers have given guidance that they will not buy from sellers who mark themselves as confidential. So this is how Sellers.JSON looked like in public comment period. After the public comment period closed, IAB released the final version on July 31st. And this is how the final version looks like with very minor changes. IAB did change directness field to seller type just for consistency. There was some amount of ambiguity with directness, but seller type, it's very intuitive for everyone to understand what seller type is. IAB also added a new field called is Passthrough. I will go into detail on that field in coming slides. Bear with me until then. We'll also explain what are the possible values of seller type in the coming slides. Having said that, so this is how the final version of Sellers.JSON looks like. Now, we have got quite a few questions on how should we list ourselves as, and we thought this is probably the most important question as part of Sellers.JSON. So any seller on your platform who doesn't get to keep the entire ad revenue would be marked as intermediary. They have to be the owner of the content, and they get to keep all the ad revenue to be listed as a publisher. Anybody else who has to share the ad revenue with upstream content owners would become intermediary, including Google Exchange Bidding and Amazon EAM. I'll move on to what is Passthrough. Passthrough is a provision made for entities like Exchange Bidding, Amazon EAM to publish the customers that are participating in EB and EAM, but who still have a relationship with the downstream entity. As an example, let's say CNBC works with PubMatic through Google EB. Then if you go to Google and go to their Sellers.JSON, you should expect to see CNBC's account listed as is Passthrough. That's because CNBC has direct control on the platform of PubMatic, whereas EB is just facilitating, and IAB wanted to make special provision to capture that relationship. So is Passthrough is an optional field, and this would be used mostly by EB and any entities that have similar relationship as EB. So now I will walk you through a couple of examples. I did explain to you about intermediary and publisher. There are some entities that end up performing both the roles, meaning they can hold partial inventory that is owned and also might be offering managed services for long tail publishers. Such entities can list themselves as both. So here is a first example of a publisher. So what you see here is at a higher level, Sellers.JSON is an ads.txt version for all the tech platforms operating in ad tech environment. Ads.txt would be managed by publishers, whereas Sellers.JSON would be managed by the intermediaries. And the whole essence of this is by having the ads.txt, sellers.json, and supply chain object, you can build the whole path. So the biggest drawback that sellers.json alleviates is, if you notice here, you have PubMatic 32637, which is a direct relationship. If 32637 happens to be a reseller, buyers doesn't have exposure to who that 32637 is. Sellers.json is aimed to solve that problem. And here is an example of PubMatic's Sellers.json and how Zillow is listed on Sellers.json. So you see the same seller ID which matches to the publisher ID, and 32637 is Zillow, and their domain is Zillow, and seller type is publisher. Another variation of Sellers.json is an intermediary who works with PubMatic and its server. So if you go see domains that are monetizing through Sovereign and PubMatic link, you can go and use ads.txt to verify this seller ID. And here is an example of an entity that has both direct and resold inventory. So that's Sellers.json at a very high level. I know you guys might have questions. Hold on to them until the end. Let me go through the supply chain object, and we will deal with questions towards the end. So now for supply chain object. What's the problem behind the supply chain object? It's very similar to the problem that I have described for Sellers.json. But the biggest difference is supply chain object information would be used by systems to infer the information about the buyers, whereas Sellers.json can be reviewed by humans to do quick audits. It's essentially the same information, but supply chain would be consumed by systems, whereas Sellers.json is for public, but for both buyers and publishers to go onto those pages and validate the information. The end result of supply chain object is buyer and intermediary tech systems and can easily parse the information to gain transparency into the money trail. At the end of the day, the buyers can determine who are all the entities that are involved in that particular transaction. So that provides them a great deal of transparency, and they can use that information to eliminate suspicious, fraudulent sellers. Again, the same thing, as I have walked you through Sellers.json, this is the layout for supply chain object. What you are seeing here is the definition of supply chain object in the public comment period, and I'll also show you how it changed in the final release. The reason why I'm walking you through both the versions is I know some of our customers have adopted supply chain object even before it became public. So this is for the benefit of those customers who know by the end of this session, they will know what has changed, and they can make those minor tweaks so they are in compliance with the final spec. So again, the complete attribute and an array of nodes. Complete attribute is used to capture whether a supply chain is complete or not. And each node represents the business entity that participates in that transaction. So the node will be expanded into 6 fields, starting with advertiser system information, publisher ID, request ID, name of the publisher, domain of the publisher, and extension. I will show you examples for each of this attribute, but I want to move on to how the final version looked like. So the final version, you see, just so the spec is consistent with Sellers.JSON. Supply chain object also now has a version and extension. Both are version captures what version of supply chain object spec this supply chain is following. And until we have the second version, the version will always be 1.0. The publisher ID got changed to seller ID to make it consistent with everything else about the spec. And we did add a new field called handles payment. Handles payment is a required field, and it would be marked as 1 until we have a revision of this spec. The reason why we have to add this is to future-proof the spec. So in future, we can add other entities who don't deal with payment. So here is a quick example of how a supply chain object would look like in a bid request. So what you are seeing here is an originating bid request from, let's say, PubMatic has a direct relationship with a publisher whose ID is 145689. What PubMatic would do is it would create the supply chain object that you see under extension object. We will mark the complete flag as 1 because we know it's a direct publisher. Because we are adding the chain, we are going to mark it as complete, and we would introduce add system information, which would be PubMatic, publisher ID, and request ID. I'll move on to the second example. So the second example is when PubMatic is reselling a bid request coming from a direct seller. So what you are seeing here is PubMatic would receive the request with complete marked as 1 and the first node. What PubMatic does is it picks up that information and just appends our information and passes it on to the downstream entities. Move on to the example 3. When you're not supporting supply chain object, you don't include any information, and you don't add the S chain. So this is example 3 of a system that doesn't support supply chain. Example 4 is PubMatic reselling a request coming from an entity that doesn't support supply chain. So we do know which entities are direct and which entities are resellers. And for all resellers who doesn't support supply chain, we will add our first node, but we will mark the complete flag as false. That way, buyer knows that this chain is not complete and all they have is partial information about the seller on PubMatic. So those are the examples, and I have summarized all the implementation summary in a single slide for supply chain object. I'll quickly go through. So the first scenario is if you are a seller, first seller, you set complete to 1 and you add the first node. If you are a seller reselling the inventory that has supply chain object, copy the whole supply chain object and add the node on your platform. If you are selling a reseller inventory without supply chain object, mark the complete attribute as false because you did not get the supply chain and add the first node that reflects the entity on your platform. There are 2 important nodes here. As a reseller, it is invalid to copy the supply chain object from the previous seller and not include your information. If you ever have to copy the incoming supply chain, you have to include your information. And if you don't end up including, and if buyers figure that out, the buyers did tell us that such sellers would be banned from their platforms for life. Please note that point. If you guys don't want to support supply chain, don't send anything. Please avoid copying the supply chain coming from the upstream and sending it the way it is, because you are tampering the data. The final point is, don't include SChain if your system is not supporting. So that's high-level implementation summary of supply chain object. So now I will move on to some of the use cases on how supply chain object can be supported on tag integrations or vast URLs or pre-bid or any non-RTB integration methods. There was a great deal of confusion on this topic, so I have created a separate section so we can go over this. At a very high level, what supply chain is irrespective of the integration method, it's a way of passing on information from one entity to other. So for partners who are using tag-based integration, we are going to provide a macro by name SChain in which the partner can send information to us. What PubMatic would do is it would parse that information and transform it into OpenRTB and send it to the buyers. The concept is very similar for vast URLs if you are directly integrated into video players and sending the information to us. In the vast URL, you will have a parameter called SChain, and you will insert the SChain information. In the coming slides, I will talk about how to format the supply chain information so the downstream systems can parse and transform it into OpenRTB. So this is the definition of, or this is the syntax for how to serialize SChain. So you can send it in SChain macro through either tag-based integration, pre-bid, or a vast URL. SChain has two main pieces, right? One is at a high level, what is the version and whether the chain is complete or not. Once that piece is done, all you have is a list of nodes that represent each entity that touches the bid request. So the serialization format for SChain would be, it would be version separated by comma, and then you have the place for sending the complete information. Once that is done, every node is separated by a bag. And the node would be expanded to, again, add system information, seller ID, handles payment, and the following optional fields, which are request ID, publisher name, publisher domain, and extension. Please note that if you don't want to include the optional fields, you can exclude them, but the comma should remain intact so the parsing systems can infer the data accurately. So here is a quick example of how a supply chain object in JSON format would translate into a serialized piece of text. I know it's very verbose and very detailed, but once we open up for questions, I'll answer any additional doubts you guys may have. So what you see on the left-hand side is a single hop complete chain, which has version and complete flag, and then it has one node with all the fields which have advertiser system information, seller ID, handles payment, request ID, name, and domain. So that gets translated into the value you see on the right. That's version, comma, complete one, then bang, you see PubMatic, comma, seller ID, comma, handles payment, comma, request ID, comma, publisher name, comma, publisher domain, and comma is for extension. So we don't have any information for extension, so that would be a blank field. So this is how you serialize the supply chain information, and you put it in the supply chain S-chain macro and hand it to PubMatic, and PubMatic would parse that information, make it into an OpenRTB request, add our node, and sell it to the buyers. So that's the summary of Sellers.JSON and supply chain object. We will now open the floor for Q&A.
Great, thanks, Ash. I appreciate you going through that in such detail. So yeah, per Ash is a lot to take in there. So we'll open the floor. Icon, and we will get to it. I also have a poll going asking, when do you think your organization, your company will have SEO and Sellers.JSON implemented? And the choices are under 2 months, by the end of this year, 2020, or no plans to do so. So any questions?
Yeah, you can ask those in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand, your choice.
Okay, we have our first question. Ash, question is ads.txt going to be deprecated if we implement sellers.json, or are they both necessary?
Thanks for the question. We got this question from an anonymous person. No, the answer for that question is no, we don't think ads.txt is going to be deprecated. I want to make it very clear. Ads.txt is for publishers who produce content and want to tell the world who is authorized to sell the inventory. Sellers.JSON supply chain object is for tech platforms who drive monetization for digital publishers, and by combining both ads.txt and sellers.json, you get end-to-end transparency.
Another question, Ash. How soon do you recommend that pubs implement sellers.json?
We strongly recommend publishers to become compliant with Sellers.JSON and supply chain object by August 31st. The reason behind that is TTD, being one of the biggest buyer, have rolled out their new inventory quality policy. If you guys want details, please reach out to the customer success manager of your account. But the gist of the new inventory quality policy is TTD will not buy any inventory that have incomplete supply chain object, or they don't support sellers.json. The essence is, if you end up being our partner who don't support sellers supply chain object, we eventually have to send incomplete chains to TTD, and TTD would drop those requests. If TTD happens to be the largest buyer on your platform, you should implement Sellers.JSON and supply chain object before August 31st.
Another question for you, Ash. This is from, and forgive me, Rada, if I mispronounced your last name, Rada Guermas. If a publisher has an ORTB tech platform, do they need to implement Sellers.JSON and SEO?
Yes. So as I have walked you through the scenario, Sellers.JSON is for public, supply chain object is for systems. In other ways, Sellers.JSON can be read by human beings, whereas supply chain object is mostly consumed by systems. By choosing to implement one thing or the other, you are not participating in this initiative completely. There are some buyers who have given explicit direction in terms of what they expect. They want supply chain object and sellers.json both to be implemented concurrently, and both are required.
Great, thanks. Thanks for the question, Rita. Next question, anonymous. What do you need to implement at a publisher level?
Publisher doesn't have to implement anything related to supply chain object or sellers.json. As I have mentioned, both sellers.json and supply chain object are only for tech platforms that drive monetization for content producers.
Yeah, and I would add to that, at the publisher level, you just need to make sure you have an ads.txt file or an app ads.txt responsibility. You have to make sure the world knows who's an official reseller. Last call for questions. Any more? Well, we got the results of our poll with a whopping 3 votes. Total participation. That these 3 people, 100% of them will have SEO and sellers.json implemented by the end of the year. Great news. Great. Well, thanks, everybody.
Hey, one last thing, guys, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your customer success managers. They're all equipped to provide you with additional information. Eric, I do see one new question flowing in. You want to take that?
Yeah, what do you need to implement if you're a sales house? Good question.
Yes, it's a great question. Depends on how you are integrated. If you are, it's the same concept whether you're a sales house or an open RTB intermediary. The idea of this initiative is to build a money trail. If you are integrated through a tag, your tag needs to be updated to share the S-chain information with PubMatic. Usually sales houses have direct relationship with the publishers. So what I anticipate to see is in the supply chain object, we will have only one node, and we want to see the ID of the publisher, your business domain, handles payment would be 1, and you can exclude all the optional fields. So essentially, what you need to populate in your S-chain is 1.0, 1, bang, your business domain name, whatever is the ID attributed to that account, and handles payment would be 1. We take that information, make it the first node, and we will add the second node with who that sales house is. That way, the buyer would know that this is coming from a sales house on PubMatic platform, and the sales house is working directly with the publisher.
Great. Last call for questions. Any last questions? Well, great. Well, thank you all for participating and joining our training on Sellers.json and SEO. I want to thank Ash for presenting. He's been deep in the weeds on this as we've been rolling this out ourselves. It's not an easy thing, and you guys are, if this is new to you, you guys are, I'm sure you've got a good, you've become aware that it's pretty difficult, so it's important to understand it. Oh, wait, I got one more question. Another question came in while I was blabbing away. Will the information on the S-chain be encrypted in a similar way as it would on an open ledger?
Yes. No. there won't be any encryption on the S chain, but if your publisher name or the domain has comma or bang, the information should be encoded so that the format is not mangled. So I will repeat one more time. If your publisher name or request ID or any other fields have comma or bang in your values, those values should be encoded so the syntax of S-chain is not mangled. Reading the parsing systems would decode and then parse and then transform it into OpenRTB format.
Great.
So no
Thanks,
encryption, S2 encoding if you have comma or bang in your values.
Great. Again, thanks everyone. On behalf of Ash and Adam Smith, our senior product marketing manager who put this all together, appreciate the time. Hope you learned something. And feel free, please follow up with your customer success managers if you need more information, more details, or have further questions. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, guys.